So many of you watching YouTube for the last month or so may have come across ThatVeganTeacher. More specifically, you'd have seen the video of her kind of stalking Tommy Innit, who's a popular Minecraft YouTuber and who's also a child. She recently got banned from TikTok for a very suggestive video directed towards him, and I'm glad she's off the platform and can't harass him there anymore. A quick summary about her is that she's a channel that promotes veganism in a very, very aggressive manner. Aside from making TikToks telling people to go vegan, she also makes controversial videos like coming out as LGBTQ is selfish, and Black Lives Matter? No, all lives matter, especially animal lives. They're clearly made to garner attention and to anger people to draw them towards her channel. She's also responded to several commentary channels with equally strange responses. A part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I myself am a born vegetarian whose food culture is actually pretty much vegan. I just don't put dairy restrictions on myself. And I've also slowly removed as much dairy as possible out of my diet. I also grew up in a place where it's normal for people to practice vegetarianism and veganism. In fact, it's almost pretty much the norm to do so. So, at the very least, I've done the whole don't eat meat thing a lot longer than she has. The other reason is because I'm passionate about sustainable development. It's something that I'm studying right now and considering specializing in. So, I think I have some credibility to talk about this topic. ThatVeganTeacher, or TVT as I'll call her from now on, is someone you would call a self-proclaimed ethical vegan. From watching her videos, you can tell she's very passionate about animals. She also fires back at several creators who respond to her extremities and asks them to watch The Dominion, which is a documentary on the exploitation of animals. Now, I actually tried to watch it. Emphasis on tried, okay? I ended up watching only parts of it and had a panic attack in the middle of the night, despite being a vegetarian who barely consumes dairy anyway. So I can't imagine what it must be like for a meat eater to watch this documentary. And if that is the state of mind with which TVT decided to go vegan and promote veganism, that is not healthy. Because there are a lot of aspects aside from the purely emotional one that you need to consider before promoting veganism. And this purely emotional standpoint has led her to make some faults in the promotion of veganism. Before we go into it, however, here is a big disclaimer. I am not trying to argue that a certain dietary lifestyle is good or bad. I'm not here to tell you what diet you should be following or promoting. I think veganism is a great practice, and I'm glad there are people who are so passionate about animal welfare and protecting the environment. The only thing I'm trying to do is provide a more balanced opinion on the subject. For the purpose of this video, I've tried to use as many credible resources like research papers, analyses from organizations that collect data, etc. However, I do not claim to be an expert on the topic, and my knowledge on the subject comes from relevant classes that I've taken at my university. You should also know that some of the information I will be sharing is based on my own knowledge from projects that I have done, as well as other people's experiences. Now, let's talk about these faults. From TVT's videos, it's very clear to see that she thinks people who consume animals or animal products are bad people, or unethical. Animal welfare is a major part of why people choose to be vegan, and it is true that animal products found in grocery stores do not come from ethical sources. However, TVT is not a saint either. Assuming that she gets her food from a regular grocery store, she might be contributing to some unethical practices too. For example, many of the popular vegan grocery items might not necessarily be following the most ethical practices. Take for example the avocado. The avocado industry has been linked to drug cartels who have found the increasing value of the fruit extremely profitable. These criminal organizations, including the Jalisco Nueva Generación, have fought for the control of avocado-producing regions and transport routes by engaging in violent thefts and murders. These criminal groups also coerce workers into temporary forced labor, which includes underage or child labor. This is not including the several other humanitarian risks, which include kidnappings, loss of produce, and unlawful killings. Similarly, the cashew, which is a primary vegan substitute for milk, cream, nut flours, and for general snacking, also exploits its workers. Cashews are primarily grown in some of the poorest parts of the world, including India, parts of Africa, Vietnam, and Brazil, and often employ women due to poor wages. The working conditions for these women are very poor as well. Because the nut contains a caustic liquid between two layers of hard shell, it can often lead to vicious burns and have permanently damaged the hands, lungs, and eyes of women who were not given any protective gear. In Africa, the women also work for 12 hours a day for 6 days a week just to increase their pay. This is not including the fact that the women there also primarily do all the household chores, even if their male partners are unemployed. They also report body pains primarily in the waist, swollen feet, headaches, and skin rashes. These agricultural industries also affect animals. For example, the soy industry, which is the raw material for products like tofu, soy sauce, meat substitutes, etc., has had to clear extensive acres of land to allow for soybean cultivation. This unfortunately has not only displaced indigenous communities, but it's also put animal species which are at the verge of extinction at risk. One of these animal species is the jaguar in South America. Soybean production rose to 500% since the 80s, which meant more habitat destruction and environmental degradation. It should be noted, however, that beef, clearing of forests for farming, and ranching also contribute to the endangerment of jaguars. There are tons of ethical concerns like this with the production of cocoa, almonds, quinoa, etc. And the carbon footprint that merely transporting all of these products accumulate is quite large. It also requires massive amounts of deforestation and water from communities that already suffer from acute water shortages, famines, and poverty. Also, aside from whether or not you think animals and animal products should be consumed, there are, or were, farming practices that treated cattle relatively well. Household cattle farming used to be a predominant practice in India, although you should note that India has slowly moved away from that practice. That being said, most cattle farming is still small scale. The refugee community in Clarkston, Georgia is also a great example of ethical treatment of animals, and it's one of the most sustainable communities I have seen. During a project I was working on about the refugee communities, I got the chance to speak with Yarrow Koenig, and they talked about Global Growers, which is a small-scale sustainable agricultural initiative that allows refugees to practice traditional farming and grow food. In some cases, this also includes rearing household cattle and poultry. The farmers only grow food for their community and sell any surplus produce to the local farmers market. In household cattle rearing, the calf is allowed to drink how much ever it needs, and only leftover milk is taken from the cow and used to feed the family. The milk is only sold if there's some left over even after consumption. In India, the practice is more strict, and the family is not allowed to sell any milk at all. However, household cattle rearing isn't perfect. There are some disadvantages that come with having a cow in a personal shed outside the house. According to a study on dairy cow welfare, household cattle are tethered for extended periods of time, which have led to injuries and disease. The good news is that these are easily fixable provided that the rearers are informed of better practices and that regular checks are made to ensure ethical treatment. And this form of cattle rearing is still far better than regular dairy farms. Don't get me wrong, this isn't to say that there aren't benefits to practicing veganism or that veganism is bad, or that the meat and animal product industry does not have problems. It just doesn't sit right with me that TVT calls other people immoral or selfish for supporting the meat and animal product industry when there clearly are a number of problems with the agricultural industry as well. And I would honestly argue that the refugee communities in Clarkston who rear their own animals and grow their own food for consumption are more sustainable and ethical than a vegan who buys their produce and vegan products from a supermarket. Moreover, there have been accusations that she's told a child they would go to hell for not being vegan, and she stalked and made horrific remarks about another minor. What confuses me is that I don't know if she understands that what she said was wrong. If she does know that they were wrong and controversial, then she's clearly doing all of this for attention. If I were to promote veganism and a huge number of people told me that the way I was promoting it was wrong, I would at the very least consider what they're saying. Her methods of promotion clearly aren't driving many people to go vegan, so the fact that she continues with these methods is probably a sign that she's doing this to bring more attention to herself. And that is selfish and immoral. One of the main faults that TVT makes is putting the bulk of responsibility on the consumer. What she forgets is that there are many individual and systemic level factors that prevent people from going vegan. On a personal level, it is possible that not everyone is suited to the diet. Denise Minger, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, wrote an article about how different people's bodies respond to the vegan diet differently. I'm linking the article in the description if you'd like to read it, but some main takeaways from it are as follows. Luckily, science is nudging closer to an understanding of why people respond differently to low or no animal food diets, with a great deal of the answer rooted in genetics and gut health. No matter how nutritionally adequate a vegan diet looks on paper, metabolic variation can determine whether someone thrives or flounders when going meat-free and beyond. To put this into perspective, here are some excerpts from Claire's Eat with Clarity cooking blog, where she talks about her personal experience with becoming an ethical vegan and why she had to discontinue it. Regarding the hair loss she experienced, she says, I'm in huge handfuls that will require me to clean the shower drain at least 3 times over a course of a 5 to 10 minute shower. I experienced a lot of digestive discomfort and acne so severe I could hardly sleep. No matter what food I cut out or added back, it stayed the same. My skin was terrible, my energy was low, and it was really hard finding foods that didn't irritate my body. Eventually, after getting multiple rounds of blood work done, I learned I had severe hormonal imbalances, leaky gut, several nutrition deficiencies despite my diligent supplementation, and varied plant-based diet. I added in eggs, wild-caught fish, and organic chicken a few times a week. I soon noticed I no longer had the gassy and bloated feeling after I ate. Changes certainly did not occur overnight, but over time I started to feel much better, and my blood work reflected that. Is eating an entirely plant-based diet a kinder way to treat the animals on the planet? Without question, yes. But I needed to find a happy medium and treat myself kindly. Moreover, there are ongoing discussions about whether dairy alternatives offer as many benefits as milk. There are many vegans that talk about how milk isn't beneficial and actually doesn't help with building strong bones. However, according to this research paper by Thorning and Alia, it does offer a lot of other benefits. Again, if you want to read about the benefits of milk, the paper can be found in the description. The paper also compares dairy alternatives to milk and compares the dairy alternatives to each other. The paper states that the nutrient density of different plant-based milk substitutes varies, and that soy milk is the only alternative that comes close to replicating the protein content in cow's milk. The paper also notes that some alternatives have a high sugar content. It says, some plant-based drinks have a sugar content equal to that of sugar-sweetened beverages, which have been linked to obesity, reduced insulin sensitivity, increased liver, muscle, and visceral fat content, as well as increased blood pressure. The paper also states that there needs to be more research done on the subject. As the plant-based drinks have undergone processing and fortification, any health effects of natural soy, rice, oats, and almonds cannot be directly transferred to the drinks, but need to be studied directly. Only a few studies have compared the effects of cow's milk with plant-based drinks as whole foods on disease markers. However, none of these have included commercially available drinks or disease endpoints. Therefore, the evidence is currently insufficient to conclude that plant-based drinks possess health benefits above those of milk and dairy products. Until more research has been conducted and a scientifically sound conclusion can be drawn, health authorities should be cautious about recommending plant-based drinks as acceptable substitutes to cow's milk for the general population. Aside from physical reasons, there are mental health-related reasons that could affect someone's ability to practice veganism. Eating disorders is a prominent example that comes up in the discussions about veganism. Some people claim that veganism has worsened their disorder because it involves restricting their diet, while others have claimed it's actually created a positive relationship between their bodies and food. Current research on the subject is inconclusive on whether veganism is beneficial or detrimental for people with EDs. However, in my opinion, even if research were to conclude for or against veganism, I don't think it should be generalized for everyone. If someone has an ED or any other mental health issue that affects their diet, it's important that they consult a nutrition specialist and a psychologist before trying veganism. And if someone finds that the diet is not working for them or worsening their situation, it's important that we understand that it's their body and their health, and that we are compassionate and supportive towards them. There are various social or systemic determinants that affect people's ability to practice veganism as well. There are a lot of people on the internet that talk about how veganism isn't for the privileged, unlike what so many against veganism have claimed. However, I would argue that just because it isn't for the wealthy or for the privileged, that doesn't mean that everyone can afford it. Food insecurity is still a major issue even in developed countries like the United States. I feel like we have an image of who we consider to be food insecure or poor, but in reality, these are people who attend our public schools, our universities, and who work low-paying jobs. An opinion piece by Sofia Corsetti talks about the privilege of choice that vegans have in choosing what they want to eat. She says, others, namely America's poor, have access to only non-vegan products. A comment points out that they do have access to cheap produce, pasta, and other non-meat products. But we are talking about ethical veganism here, and while it isn't a privilege to be able to afford general produce, it is a privilege to be able to afford ethically and sustainably sourced organic produce. Ms. Corsetti also points out the condition of people who live in food deserts, which have heavy racial undertones. Na Oyo Akwait talks about how Black communities have some of the highest densities of fast food chains compared to other communities. Non-Black communities tend to have convenient access to supermarkets, whereas Black communities don't, and therefore seek out fast food restaurants. And this segregation doesn't just apply to low-income communities. Quaid says that in New York, wealthy college-educated African Americans are ghettoized and live in neighborhoods that are 30% poorer than comparable whites. So even wealthier Black people have difficulties with accessing food due to systemic racism. It's absolutely wrong to place the entire weight of change on the consumer when there are so many things that inhibit them from doing so. TVTs claim that it's selfish to think about your health and that we should only think about animals is such an unhealthy mindset. Extremist vegans need to understand that pitting one diet against another isn't helpful because it views the situation as black and white, even though there's clearly a lot of gray area. Plus, there are many people who just aren't as passionate about animal rights as ethical vegans are. Arguing with them is not going to change that. So far, we've seen that even vegan staples such as soy and cashew also have a record of exploitation of both human beings and animals. We've also seen that it may not be pragmatic to force everyone to switch to veganism. Even still, I know that there might be a lot of people who do care about the environment and about the ethical treatment of animals. So, what can we do? You can reduce your environmental footprint by reducing your consumption of red meat or by swapping out red meat for other healthier meats. Studies from the US Department of Agriculture have shown that, compared with a typical Western diet, reducing processed/red meat to 3 ounces a day can reduce an individual's environmental footprint, including land, energy, and water consumption along with gas emission, by 72%. Climate Lab at the University of California also shows that there isn't much of a difference between vegan, vegetarian, and Mediterranean diets. So you could try any one of these diets and reduce your personal footprint considerably. It's equivalent to taking 1 billion cars off of roads. And even if you chose to simply reduce your meat consumption, every little bit counts. I'll put a link to the video in the description. I highly recommend watching it. You could also buy your meat locally. Locally sourced food is healthier, reduces carbon emissions from transportation and refrigeration, and would help local economies. In terms of ethics, conscious carnivores, as Lynn Curry puts it, look at trying to buy ethical meat. Talking about a meat eater she interviewed, she says, "For some, there is no ethical justification for eating meat, and killing farm animals is unconscionable. But conscious carnivores like Earls accept the raising and killing of farm animals for food from the perspective of least harm. So long as livestock is treated compassionately, that is to say, a good life free from confinement and illness with a quick and stress-free death, the meat is ethical." I'm aware that there are some farmers in Scotland that are trying more ethical ways to raise cattle. They basically stop separating the calf from its mother from a young age, regardless of its gender. They're also trying more ethical ways of selling male calves for the production of veal. I'm pretty sure this way of farming isn't widespread, but there's been research done on the attitudes of consumers of beef and dairy that have found that consumers do want their meat and dairy to be produced ethically. I think there are also some countries in Europe that have passed legislation to expand the welfare of cattle. I'm pretty sure that one of them was about preventing the unnecessary killing of male calves. If you want to know more about these practices, I'll put the link to the article on farmers in Scotland and the paper on consumer attitudes in the description. You could also save seeds or plant some of them and grow your own food. I know it isn't exactly possible for everyone to just up and start a farm, but anything from small herbs to some fruits and vegetables would not only reduce your financial costs, but it would also reduce your personal footprint, since driving does contribute to carbon emissions. It would also be healthier for you to do so. Saving seeds is also a great way to not only preserve your food culture, but to also preserve biodiversity. Saving seeds from your healthiest plants helps the seed adapt to the climate and soil conditions. It's an amazing practice and I hope more people do it. If you're unable to change your diet or the place you get your food from, you could also consider changing some other aspects of your life. There's a lot more exploitation going on in the clothing industry, the smartphone industry, and the beauty industry. You could try switching out some of your necessities like toothpaste for more ethical and sustainable alternatives. I've heard about those toothpaste pellets that you get refills for. Brands like Bite are completely plastic-free so tubes don't end up in the ocean. You can also avoid using plastic water bottles, straws, single-use plastic bags, and containers to reduce water and land pollution. If you don't have to switch out everything, do as much as you can. If you can't afford to switch out a necessity, consider saving up and buying makeup and skincare products that are vegan and cruelty-free. I don't really consider makeup to be a necessity, so it makes sense to try and buy a more ethical product that I will use occasionally. Choosing sustainable and locally produced clothing instead of fast fashion, as well as thrifting, are also great ways to help the environment and discourage the use of cheap labor and poor working conditions. So all in all, none of us are perfect. This whole guilt-tripping thing just doesn't sit right with me, and you don't have to let it get to you. You have many ways to help the planet and the creatures that live in it, even if it isn't practicing veganism. All that matters is that you do your part. Hi guys, I'm a new channel on YouTube. I know that my first video was a pretty big and intense one. I'm not only planning on doing videos like these, I have many other interests that I would love to explore, but because I know absolutely nothing about how to grow on this platform, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and hit the like button. It's free, it doesn't really take away anything from you, and you can always change your mind. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you. Bye!